Following the methodology from our best-selling book, The Resilience Shield, we are delighted to announce the inaugural Resilience Retreat, which will occur in far north Queensland between Thursday the 27th of October and Sunday the 30th of October.
The whole point of the retreat is to give you the ability to build your shield, to develop your knowledge and understanding of the key principles related to resilience, to enhance your toolkit and to optimise your performance.
Come and be part of an incredible group of humans that are like-minded, meet our facilitators and motivational speakers. To find out more, email us at retreat@resilientshield.com. Hope to see you there.
Welcome to the Unforgiving 60 with your hosts, Ben Pronk and Tim Curtis. As two ex-SAS guys armed with MBAs, Ben and Tim seek out people leading lives less ordinary and talk with them about how they fill their unforgiving minutes and what helps them go, always, a little further. Like intellectual bowerbirds, we aim to collect shiny little objects of knowledge that we think can help build better humans.
G'day everyone and welcome to the Unforgiving 60 podcast. My name is Ben Pronk.
And my name is Tim Curtis.
That it is. Now, before we get into this episode, we just want to put a bit of a trigger warning out there. This episode is going to be talking about the Bali bombing with an individual who was actually there, and as such it's going to contain some detail which some people may find disturbing, and sort of details of the incident as well as some of the trauma that followed. So we certainly advise, if you feel that that's going to be something that's difficult for you, to maybe reconsider before you go on. And we certainly advise that if anyone is having issues with stressors or trauma of any nature, then please get in touch with some of the wonderful counselling services that are available, including the ones we are going to link in the show notes.
Yeah, well said. And I met Brad McIlroy actually in the SAS Soldiers Club, the Gratwick Club, aka the Grotto. He approached me and said, let's have a chat. And I'm not too proud to say that when he started to tell this story, I was in absolute tears. It is incredible and somewhat confronting, this particular story about a guy, 19 years old, just playing footy from a footy club that were pretty average, quite frankly, but had a pretty good year.
Yeah.
And they went to Bali to celebrate it, and the year was 2002, and the month was October, and the day was the 12th.
And look, my story with Macca sort of goes back a number of years before that, but I'd never heard this story. I was aware clearly that he'd had this sort of life-changing experience through the Bali bombing, but it was only during the recording of this podcast that I really understood the full magnitude of what he'd been through, what he dealt with, what he'd done for other people during the event and in the aftermath. And I can only echo your sentiments, Tim. I was pretty much gobsmacked for most of this conversation in terms of what an amazing human he is.
We talk a lot about resilience, and certainly Dan talks about post-traumatic growth. This is a guy who epitomises our definition of resilience.
Absolutely. I mean, if you are talking about the ability to get through something tough and come out on the other end, the ability to, as Lise Notabart would say, have a better than expected outcome given the adversity faced. This is a human who has faced a ridiculously difficult adversity and has had an absolutely incredible outcome and is a real inspiration, I think, not only to people who've dealt with trauma, but to anyone.
How do we get around the fact that in this interview he says, I haven't really been through much, not in comparison with you guys?
Put it this way, if Brad McIlroy has not been through much, I do not want to hear the story of someone who's been through a lot.
Let's hear his story. Let's get on with the show. Well, welcome to the Unforgiving 60 podcast. I'm Tim Curtis, as always, with my co-host Ben Pronk.
How are you, Tim?
Absolutely fantastic.
You don't look it. No, you're looking good. You're looking good. Good morning.
Rundown. Good morning to you, and good morning to Brad McIlroy.
Nailed it.
Macca. I had to practice that a few times. Well, I've only ever known Macca as Macca.
Yeah.
And in fact, the little backstory, I was up the Gratwick Club, the club in the SAS regiment on Anzac Day, and, you know, having a drink, and this guy walks past, grabs me, says, "You're going to be here for a little while longer." Correct me if I'm wrong here, Macca.
Sounds about right.
I said, yeah. He goes, I want to grab a drink and let's have a chat. And I thought, sort of fit-looking young fella, he was an operator, I'd never seen him before. Off he went to the bar, brought back 2 rums and Coke, and started telling me his story, which was incredible. And I think I'm not exaggerating here. I was in tears when I started to hear some of that story. I mean, how he got connected to the regiment, and he was not an operator, but a very close connection with the personalities in the regiment. We'll explore some of that in a little while.
And big fan of the regiment's second out of 2 best rock bands tongue chart.
And if you've ever forgotten the tunes from Tongue Charge, here's one just as a little teaser.
Yeah, we're boys from Perth. Two of the boys went down last year, so we're going to play one song. A couple. Here all night.
Macca, can you talk about your childhood and growing up in Perth?
Yeah, well, I probably didn't grow up in Perth, actually. I was born in Esperance.
Great research.
So let's talk about the Kingsley Footy Club. You know, where is it, and what do those critters get up to?
Bit of deja vu. So Kingsley Footy Club, it's obviously part of the Kingsley suburb, which is northern suburb of Perth, just inland from Hillary's. Massive junior football club, one of the biggest in the Southern Hemisphere for years. Thousands of kids running around sort of 3 ovals. So sort of came through those ranks. There is a difference between the Kingsley Junior Football Club and Kingsley Amateur, sort of seniors footy club. Bit of separation between the two, but still fall under one sort of big banner, I suppose. So, so it's not always a given that you play juniors and then play seniors with the Ammies. So,
And your position? Where did you play?
I was growing up. I was a bit shorter and a bit rounder than I am now. So, played sort of back pocket or forward pocket. Bit of a hiding role, but as I said, it's I was more of a social footballer than
short round kids get back pocket or forward pocket. Yeah. That's the
exactly.
Or not at all. They can also play in the Dungeons and Dragons Club.
Well, that's what you know that. You know that.
Yeah, I warmed a fair amount of the bench for a while, I think so. Yeah.
Well, let's come to 2001, and Kingsley Footy Club were pretty crap. Yep. In fact, I was reading an article that was written on the Kingsley Footy Club, and I might just quote you a little section of it. You're going to love this. Kingsley had been the sort of club that parents warn their boys about and steer them away from. Perhaps they'd heard the original club song, quote, "We like to drink, we like to smoke, we think that life's a fucking joke," unquote, and had decided that they would take their talents anywhere. Kevin Paltridge said, "We were an E-grade football side that was going nowhere. we were a social team that was never going to win a premiership. Is that accurate? Leading up to 2002?
Pretty accurate. In fact, I was. We've got a 20-year anniversary for some stuff coming up in the near future, and I was reading some of the old football logs from 95, 96 when the club first got around the competition in Sunday League. And there's some fantastic quotes along the lines of Kingsley once again played gallantly, although went down by over 100 points. And so beaten by Rolly Stone.
So we're in Amos, we're playing E grade at that time.
In 2001, we were E grade amateurs. Yep. We'd come from Sunday League, and then enter
Simon Quayle and some teammates from an A grade team, Scarborough.
Yep.
Jason Stokes, Anthony Stewart, Brad Phillips. And they brought, the ideas, new rules and discipline, including that you had to turn up to training twice a week.
It's rubbish, isn't it?
That is bullshit.
And quite odd, our football started getting better with a few of those. I couldn't believe it. But they also brought in some really some fun new culture. We were basically just a bunch of mates that sort of used to kick the footy around, and these guys brought in some actual football nous and the like. We had some great footy players, don't get me wrong, but these guys brought in a slightly higher level of professionalism around football. So
in 2002, you start to win a few games, and indeed the reserve grade side wins the club's first ever premiership.
Yep, I played every game of that year except the grand final. I got dropped by my coach on the Thursday night. We used to go for beers after Thursday night training and selection. And I'd buy him rum and coke every Thursday night at the pub, rum and coke. And he said, keep this up, you're going to get a spot. And when he dropped me on the Thursday night, he said, you were one bourbon and coke shy. So I didn't actually play in the game, but I played all season. So.
How did that feel, sitting on the bench and watching the boys win a premiership?
I'm very much a community ideas sort of guy, so I was pretty happy. I knew if someone was going to get dropped, it was probably going to be me. So I'd sort of pre-prepared myself, I suppose, in the outcome. But didn't say it didn't hurt. But it was good to see the boys get a win, and I was certainly part of all the celebrations that took off from there. Yeah,
and the senior team also made the grand final, didn't win, but got promoted from E grade to D grade.
Correct. Yeah, which was a big move. Move for us as a club,
and as part of all this sort of change culture and the new vision, there was a plan, of course, at the end of the year to go on a footy trip to Bali.
Absolutely. So the club, yes, it was sort of 3 teams, or 2 by then, because our Colts had sort of forfeited the season. But there was a real core group of about 20 blokes that, regardless of what team you played in, we'd all be, on the beers on weekends and catching up. So there was a really good core of guys. So even though the ones lost, there was the footy trip planned was certainly half of them and basically half of the twos. And all year we'd prepared. We had stupid bottle tops that, if you got caught with it not on your persons, it was a fine and all this sort of stuff. So, and you'd have guys knocking on your door at 2 a.m. in the morning to try and catch you out. Yeah, exactly. So there was all sorts of little challenges and whatever throughout the season, and all leading up to this, what was meant to be a pretty incredible footy trip away.
And how many guys ended up going to Bali?
There was 20, so there was 19 blokes in the footy club, and then another guy filled in for a bloke that couldn't take his spot, so there was 20 of us that went over.
And on the 12th of October 2002, you decided to enter into a bar and have a few drinks. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so it sort of started, our plane had got delayed from Perth, so I think we were meant to take off at about 10 or 11 o'clock. Plane was delayed till about 2:30, so there's 20 blokes going to a footy trip, sitting in Perth Airport. So we decided to tuck into a few brews. So by the time we got to Bounty, we'd unpacked, we'd had a few drinks there. We then went for dinner, we'd had a few drinks there. So by the time we decided to walk into the Sari Club for the night out, we'd all had a few drinks. We'd all had a few drinks.
Well primed.
We were very well primed. Yeah. Exactly.
So at about 11 p.m. on the 12th of October, a suicide bomber inside the nightclub Paddy's bar detonated a bomb in his backpack, which injured many and caused others to flee into the street. And about 20 seconds later, a second and a far more powerful car bomb inside a Mitsubishi van was detonated by a second suicide bomber outside the Sari Club, which was an open-air thatched roof bar. What do you remember about that moment?
I remember I'd spent the previous half an hour working on how I was going to take a 21-year-old Swedish girl back to my hotel room. Funny story. She leant over quite late in the evening and said, "Could I teach her how to surf?" And I said, "We can go straight to the beach from my hotel room in the morning." Now, I've never surfed a day in my life, but I was going to work out in those hours how I was going to work out how to teach her. So, I'd just given her a big kiss. We heard the first bomb go off in Paddy's, and then there was this real delay. But the bomb sounded like a firework to me. Mm-hmm. There was that whistle before the pop. And so I remember leaning back so we could see up from under the thatch roof, waiting for the firework to sort of pop. And I'd sort of tapped her shoulder and said, "Look up." And that's when the van bomb's just gone whack. Mm. I remember seeing just a massive orange flash and then hitting the table just with this force of just an unbelievable blast behind. And then that was it, just going into a bit of shock for a while.
Understandably.
Mm. So do I remember it correctly that a number of your teammates were sitting around the same table?
Yeah, so there was myself and Joanne on one side of the table, and we had our backs to the bomb. I think we were about 8 metres away from the bomb when it detonated. On the other side, there was 2 mates and 2 girls. And then a whole lot of the other footy boys were on the dance floor. There was guys scattered everywhere in the bar. You know, we were hell-bent on organising a party back at our hotel that night. So the guys were all working their magic at all ends of the bar. So it was a pretty funny scene. But, yeah, we were all pretty scattered throughout the place, yeah.
So in that instant, 202 people were killed, yep. 88 Australians and 7 from your footy club. Yep. Another 203 were injured as a result of both of those blasts. When you retained your faculties, what did you witness?
I've heard the start of the Resilience Shield, you talk about those moments where it's almost like a movie. And I described it very early on, back in about 2003, where it felt like the start of Saving Private Ryan when he comes up on D-Day beaches and he goes into this shock where you're seeing movement, you're hearing some noise, but it's with this huge blanket of sort of shock that stands between you and reality, I suppose. So I'd sort of been blown out of my chair and into this large pillar, and then the way the bomb's actually sucked back from the external walls, I've been pulled back and ended up far closer to the bomb than when it went off, and I was on top of a little retaining wall, and I could not breathe for the life of me. I'd sort of busted a few ribs, and I could feel that there was quite a bit of pressure on my face, so I knew I'd been somewhat damaged by whatever just happened. So in the moments of that sort of extreme winded condition, I was trying to take a bit of stock of what's going on. And it was these moments before the fire sort of really erupted where it was just no one knows what's just happened. People are sort of just littered around and the whole club was basically at floor level now. And then this fire just went up. So I just remember thinking, right, get your breath. Get out of there. Didn't know what sort of was going on. I randomly thought there was a car accident that had just happened on the street. There was no indication that there was ever a bomb that was going to go off or anything. So we were all pretty unprepared, I suppose.
Well, I mean, completely understandably. I mean, it's not like you're in a war zone or anything.
No, exactly. There's sort of no warning, no preparation. And, we'd been drinking all day. We're on a footy trip. We're just a couple of local knockabout blokes. So, it was... and then as I said, within a couple of seconds, it just went from a weird, calm shock level to just enormous panic. This fire, obviously the thatch roofing from all the little huts had hit floor level and just ignited like it was, filled with petrol. This place just erupted. And I was only metres from the front gates, basically, so I just got up and walked out and walked past this huge crater in the ground and then sort of stood about I thought I was probably 100 metres away from the club when I stopped running, but I was about 10 metres and I turned back and thought, am I the only person that's just walked out of that place?
No one was following you?
No one came out the front way, and I was just standing there just looking at the place and it was just a fireball, and then just started seeing, people just jumping over side fences, so I could see that there was a bit of action still going on inside, between past the fire from where I was,
I'm really interested. Clearly the IED blast that I describe in the book is nothing on what you've gone through in terms of proximity and damage and all that sort of stuff. And I remember that same sort of overwhelm and the kind of Saving Private Ryan type thing where the soundtrack doesn't meet up and, that those weird sort of sensations and seeing little details. I'd talk about the undies in the tree and that sort of stuff. That just
Mars bar.
all seemed weird. Yeah, exactly. But we had all this training to fall back on.
Yeah.
Even though, we kind of expected it. IEDs were a thing.
Yep.
It still was completely disorientating. But we had this kind of training that okay, shit, I need to reorientate. We need to get a perimeter. We need to call in medevac. We had these things, this checklist to fall back on. And I think without that, I don't even know what I would have started to do. I mean, did you have any thought process, or you said okay, I'm getting out of the club, but then it's almost like, what on earth now?
Yeah, but I think everyone has an autopilot, right? You guys have been trained to react in a certain way and to how to basically direct that autopilot so it knows what to do in that instance. But it just takes over, right? Like the last thing, you're not going to sit there, looking at a fire go up while you're in the fire. Your body just says, get up, get the hell out of there.
Yeah.
And it's funny, I've got a mate who's just been awarded for pulling a kid out of the water who just got chomped by a great white. And I remember his wife giving him a heap of flack for it, saying the shark was out to sea. You've gone out to get this guy before coming in. Why didn't you just come in? You've got kids. And he said, I don't know. It's an autopilot, And you, in the same breath, you can't basically hang shit on people that do just come straight in. That's their autopilot.
Correct. Yeah, right.
So my autopilot was get up, get out, and then hang on, stop. Where am I running? I've never been here before. I remember thinking I'm running in the wrong direction than where we'd come from. So I'm going away from the hotel. And where are the boys? I'm standing here on my own. I turned 19 2 days before, and first time out of the country, and I was a kid. So, yeah.
First time I left my home, through the darkest tunnels I will roam. And if I lose my way, I can cope. I leave my largest fears behind and swim through this world of ice. But I won't give up my. I won't give up my hope.
So of those sitting around the table with you that night, how many of those at the table were killed?
All bar me and a mate.
Why did you survive? How did you survive?
No idea. So Joanne was sitting beside me, so her side and my arm was around her back. Her leg was against mine, and she was cut in half, top half sitting on top of the table. So there was basically nothing. The way we were sitting, we were 8 metres between the bomb and us, and there was nothing except a small bamboo fence between us. So, yeah, how we survivors got messed up.
So there was a 1 metre crater. You're running away from the Sari Club.
Yep.
Complete devastation. You can only imagine it.
Yep.
How did you reorientate?
I remember just standing there in just basic shock, just looking at this place going, I couldn't see how anyone else had just walked out of that. My hearing had gone at that stage. I'd perforated both eardrums. One's come back over time. The other one's decided it's not going to play the game.
Out of interest, did you hear the blast? Did you, or did it sort of shut down your
Yeah, no, I reckon I heard the blast. Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Pretty loud.
Can imagine.
It was pretty loud, but funny enough that I reckon I felt the shockwave of it before I heard it or felt it. It just sends that sound, that sort of air pressure out first. It's just incredible. It hit me like a truck. But I then saw from behind a van. I saw a mate, Jason Madden, and another mate, Cal Zoma, brother of Trav, actually.
Yeah.
Cal was my best mate for years up until then. So seeing him walk out behind a van, I just thought, you fucking beauty. I couldn't hear him, and they were both pretty dazed and in shock. And I remember grabbing Cal and saying, we're going to get back to the hotel. And they both sort of nodded, and I took that as indication, let's go back to the hotel. So the three of us ran off, and we were sort of asking directions. We were running in completely the wrong direction. But we're all pretty messed up and probably could have done with a bit of medical attention at that stage. We ended up back at the hotel and just started counting the boys coming in one by one while receiving a bit of attention ourselves. And so for the next probably 6 hours, so that was just shy of midnight basically. The next 6 hours were just who's come back. I think we had about 10 guys come back throughout the night. So there was still sort of 8 or 9 missing at the time.
And the footy club refused to leave Bali. Interesting little sidebar is the Bali hospitals were very underprepared for the amount of casualties, and you can understand that.
Yeah.
And so a lot of responsibility fell on medical evacuation to Australian hospitals.
Yep.
But the footy team refused to leave, right?
Yeah, we sort of had a real... and it was a great thing, to be able to put our energy somewhere. And we didn't really know what had happened. I remember before we sort of started going to the hospitals, it wasn't until mid-Sunday that there was a news reporter. We were sitting there in the pool bar watching the news, and they said, there's been 3 casualties. And I thought, shit, has people died in that? Even though, the amount of bodies I'd sort of run over in the way of getting out of that club, it was just weird that, holy shit, people have died in there. And then that number just kept growing and growing and growing. So...
was there obviously early days speculation about what caused it? How long before? Because I'm trying to think chronology. There hadn't really been a big terrorist attack in our region.
No,
that was the first big one.
No, that's right. Yeah, so it was Jamar Islamiyah motivated,
Yep.
and it was motivated off the back of global war on terror. But
Yep.
Australians were specifically cited
Targeted,
for our role in Timor-Leste. Interestingly, so the evidence suggests.
So I think. It was reported that some gas canisters had blown up in a kitchen until maybe later that night.
Right.
And then it sort of became pretty obvious that the crater out the front might have been something.
That wasn't there when we walked in.
We didn't keep the kitchen gas bottles out there. So, then it sort of came about, and then obviously before too long we had the Australian Federal Police over there taking statements, and they were sort of saying, look, there's something at play here. So, yeah, they were brilliant actually, those boys. Huge shout out.
Keen to come back to that, but really interested as this unfolds. How's your sort of emotional state? They talk about the 5 stages of grief. There's a sort of disbelief, and then an anger and a bargaining, or whatever. Did you go through any of those phases? And when it was, evolved that it was a deliberate act of terrorism, was there anger? How did that sort of play out?
I think we had this weird, almost bravado, but naivety amongst us. My hotel room had all its front window blown out, and I remember laying there in bed that night, and there's like broken glass on the floor.
How far away is this? Your
we
hotel?
were, but the Bounty Hotel was a good couple hundred metres. Yeah, and it just was somewhat normal that I'd just sleep in the same hotel room bed while the whole front window is just completely blown. And a mate who was staying in a room a couple of down, my roommate Phil Britton was. He was missing at the time, so I had a spare bed in my room where Brits' stuff was. So my mate Bruiser lobbed in with me, and we just sort of carried on like, oh, well, yeah, we were here on a footy trip, and then obviously reports of a bombing, and we thought, like, we better stick together. I'd much rather a mate in my room than on my own.
Yeah.
But we didn't take on board exactly with the situation. Obviously, there was just no playbook for that at that stage.
Yeah, understandable. And so the sort of situation you're saying by the pool bar is the news reports starting to come in. It strikes you as confronting or profound that people have been killed.
Yeah.
How long before, you're obviously keeping a tally of who's missing. How long before the realisation that some of your mates were caught up?
There were reports that Brits and Laurie Kerr had been helped get into taxis and get to hospitals. And so we thought, great, we didn't know what hospitals, no one knew what hospitals. There was all these makeshift sort of medical centres at the time. So we thought, okay, and that gave us an immediate focus. All right, Sunday night or Sunday afternoon, we're going to go and find Brits, and then couldn't find him. So Monday, all right, let's go and find Brits. And at the same time, we realised pretty quickly that the amount of casualties was so high that there was these makeshift morgues of sea containers with ice, and just mountains of bodies getting tagged before they get sort of chucked in the sea container. So we thought, well, hang on, we've got to very quickly send guys to the morgues or these makeshift morgues, as well as try and find the guys in the hospital. So we'd split up in 2 groups and start walking through the area, and a couple of the guys had long hair, and so whether it looked like a small unconscious girl in a bed, you'd sort of go and have a sticky beak, and okay, next room. And so we basically did that for 3 days until Wednesday. They said, you've looked at everyone, and basically it's going to be dental or DNA that we can identify these guys.
So how many were missing at that time?
8. We'd found Phil. No, I think we came home. We thought there was 7 missing. We thought 1 or 2 guys might have been shipped unconscious back to Darwin or Adelaide. So we sort of held hopes because there was a couple of Mr. X's that looked somewhat similar. So, but unfortunately, that was it.
In terms of that effort, what you've just described seems an incredibly emotional but coherent thing to do. Thinking through shit. We've checked the hospitals. We've got to check the morgues. Look, you're 19, as you said, first time out of Australia. I assume most of the teammates are in a similar sort of age bracket.
Yeah.
How did you make these decisions and sort of get on with this at such a young age?
It was like we'd been a really tight footy club, although we were pretty average. But having that, Simon was unbelievable. He had the only mobile phone amongst us, and so he was he was the coach of our ones, and so everyone had immediate respect for his direction, and we all would sit around and we'd discuss and we'd all agree on a way to sort of go about it. I don't know how many more days I could have done. I got to Wednesday morning and grabbed one of the boys and said, I can't do this anymore. And then by that stage they'd stopped commercial flights, so we couldn't get home. So it was like, shit, we're stuck here as well. Yeah. But a couple of sort of hit breaking point by then. Yeah.
A mutual friend of ours and Unforgiving 60 alum, Wayne Jones, we asked him about the Cabello massacre, obviously a very emotional and confronting time that he went through in uniform. And we were particularly interested in his description of the sort of after-action review and just he talks about sitting with a cold cup of coffee and his mates and just trying to collectively process this and almost normalise it. I mean, did you go through those sort of experiences with your mates in terms of trying to work it out?
Not really. I think that's where your and Wayne's training sort of came into stuff is to sort of review, reflect. How could we have done something better? What did you see from your side? And then you can actually wrap it up and put it away. It was really interesting to hear Wayne speak of that sort of Rwanda trip.
Yeah, I agree.
Like that. Incredibly brave, and he was a young bloke at the time as well. Yeah. But also, we've had a million beers, probably more actually. That's an understatement. and just to hear him talk about it with that level of maturity.
I was the
really
same.
Impressive.
I'd never. Yeah. In
Really
fact, that
impressive.
whole, if you haven't listened to Wayne Jones's double episode, for our listeners, I thoroughly recommend it. He's an absolute class act and really insightful.
You'll also hear Wayne play some incredible solo stuff from Don't Charge, which I found fantastic. He loved listening to that back.
Oh, that's funny.
So how and when did you meet Wayne and others?
I met Wayne in 98, 99, I think, where he came down to the footy club. And so I was probably 16, 17 then. And in walked this guy, probably hadn't slept, walked in with his footy shorts, no shirt, and a bottle of rum.
And a blue singlet.
Winnie Gold hanging out there. And he walked onto the footy field, got best on ground, and went back to his rum that was in his bag. And I thought, who the hell is this bloke? I just found a new idol, I thought. Yeah. And then, Wayne and I sort of knocked about ever since then, Yep.
So back to Bali, commercial flights were closed, but you did get home because on October the 20th, there's a picture of you in the newspaper hugging Kevin Poltridge, who was the father of Corey, who at the time was missing. Yep. So that's 8 days after the blast, still not found. Can you talk about coming home?
So we came home the Wednesday night, so that was only... blast happened Saturday night, so it was only 4 days or 5 days. As I said, it got to a point where commercial flights weren't flying. We were all still pretty strong in our mindset of, well, we'll stay until we can't do anything. And then when we were told we can't do anything, we all just sort of fell over and we're all absolutely exhausted. But there was no commercial flights. So very quickly, a guy, PK, an old Vietnam War vet, Paul Kennedy, basically sent an SOS out to a few people, and Kerry Stokes put his hand up and sent his private jet over to come pick us up. So we rolled back in like Hollywood rock stars, which we thought was pretty cool, and it gave us a sort of another moment of, this huge thing's just happened, but
just
let's
surreal,
just sort of sign out for a second, enjoy this, and had a sandwich and listen to a bit of music and watched a DVD on a little DVD player that I had. It was brilliant.
That is the way you want to come back from a footy trip. Obviously, not under those circumstances.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
A private jet's
roll
not
in,
bad.
exactly.
Yeah.
But funny, it was. We flew into the international airport. We then taxied halfway to the domestic, and they stopped the plane, and we had some customs guys come on and take all our clothes that we were wearing that night. They wanted to swab them for bomb material and whatever.
Yeah.
And I remember this really unusual moment, having a cigarette in the middle of the two airports on the runway, just going, this is so surreal.
This is weird.
This is real weird. And then they had a hangar that was set up with a heap of media and all our families in it. So we then jumped back on the plane, taxied over to them, and then got back out. So there's a whole heap of video of us getting off the plane to the media then.
So you just mentioned the customs process, and you alluded before that the AFP personnel in country were pretty magic. Can you talk a bit about your interactions with the Australian government response to the blast?
Yeah, I believe it was the Monday afternoon we'd been introduced to a few of the AFP guys that had come over, and they were unbelievable. They made us feel super welcome. There was international media just everywhere at the time. And we were getting phone calls to our hotel rooms asking for guys that were missing. Can you pop them on? And trying to work out exactly who was missing. And it was pretty nasty stuff. So the AFP guys were really good in sort of how they approached us and made us feel super comfortable. And obviously they were needing to take some pretty conclusive statements, which a lot of us hadn't actually stopped at that stage and gone back through the story in your head sort of thing. So I remember a guy, and I still keep in touch with him, Mark Lang. He sort of said, look, I wouldn't mind taking your witness statement. Do you want to go and grab a drink and come and meet me in this hotel room? And I remember buying a litre bottle of Jack Daniel's duty free. And so I've gone and grabbed this bottle.
A drink.
I've gone and grabbed this bottle and 2 glasses. And he said, I'll probably need it. So I've grabbed 2 glasses and this bottle of rum, a bottle of bourbon. Started my witness statement, and I was just sort of pouring us drinks. And by the end of it, he said, okay, we've got about 10 pages of material here, really detailed stuff. This is fantastic. I reckon I need that beer. And I said, well, I think we've polished off that bottle. He said, yeah, there's nothing left in the bottle, and he hadn't had a drink. And I reckon I was still stone cold sober. Yeah, just the first time I'd actually gone through the story in detail. So, but yeah, Lang he's kept in touch over the years, and I'm not sure if we can say it, but I'll tell you a story that in late November he rang me, so probably 6 weeks later, and said, I'm sitting in a room in the middle of nowhere with a guy we've just caught that we reckon's the mastermind. Is there anything you want me to say to him? I was like, if I could swap spots, if I could trade places just for 5 minutes, Lang of it. But he kept me abreast with all this, all the information. He knew enough to say, or what he could say, I suppose, but he knew that we wanted to know exactly what was going on with operations, because it sort of went quiet there for a while, and we thought, have they just given up on finding these blokes? And you just don't know what's going on, sort of behind closed doors, I suppose. So, but yeah, unbelievable group of guys. We still keep in touch with all of them. It's fantastic.
Can we just come back to the hangar and the reunification with family? What did that look like and feel like? To see your family there and for them to see you, but knowing that there were some of your mates that weren't going to see their family and vice versa. Yeah, so I think when we decided we were going to stay, it actually wasn't a decision. We thought, well, there's a footy trip. We're not leaving until we leave as the group we came over here with. And there was a couple of guys that passed that I was really close to. And I remember speaking to their parents on the phone, and they're saying, okay, well, we'll get the flight and we'll come over. And I remember just thinking, we can't have, my mate's dad come and walk through the morgues with us on Tuesday, or you just can't let a parent go through what we were sort of already there doing, I suppose. So, but I also think that those moments really taught you to put your emotions at the back seat. You've got a job to do. And so by the time we did come home and the hangar was there, I remember feeling far more emotional seeing the parents of my mates that didn't come back at the time than I saw, I saw mum and dad and thought, okay, great, but I've got bigger things to worry about here. I'm fine. Yeah.
On that, I mean, what you've just described is mind-blowing levels of trauma. I mean, I don't think I'd sort of twigged clearly the blast itself that evening, but what's really struck me in this conversation just now is the days afterwards, what you were taking on board and what you were
really
dealing
heavy.
with, and but going through hospitals and morgues trying to find your mate. I mean, that is full on. And even when you come back to Australia, you're still acting in that selfless mode. You've got a job to do. You're looking after other people. At what point, or did it sort of sink into you that okay, maybe I need to process this, or was there support offered or taken up by you in those early stages?
Not so much there and then, but I was pretty aware that you couldn't have come out of that without it taking somewhat of a toll, especially when you're completely unprepared for it. I accepted some professional counselling that was put on by the government at the time. They sort of gave us a couple of really willing volunteers to sort of get in and help out. None of the other boys decided to take it up. I remember Mum just saying, have a crack. And I thought, well, I can't go backwards. I can go to a few sessions and say this isn't working, but I can't go backwards. I can only actually take some positives from it. So, decided to get involved in that, and thank God I did. Thank God I did. You know? It gave me a lot of really good lessons and awareness
tools,
of myself and tools. But, well, probably not tools as much then, but I still seek counselling every now and then when I need it, and that sort of the last few years have very much given me the tools, and just being aware of mental health, and the last few years there's been huge community acknowledgement of it and how important it is, and even stuff Dan, I remember actually I can't remember what interview or what I read, but I remember a quote that Dan said, why does it have to be PTSD? Why can't there be this post-traumatic growth? And I'm very much a positive thinker and positive outlook. And so hearing that and thinking, well, great, why can't I be better? Why does it need to be this? When you think of PTSD, you think of this black spiral that points south, Why does it have to be that? Why can't I acknowledge what's happened and think, well, I know how bad shit can be, and there's guys that aren't here today that have the opportunity I have, with a heart that still beats. And so, got to live life to the fullest. So I try and do that every day.
Well, and also, and again, just reflecting on what you've just shared with us, what you did during those moments, the composure you displayed, and then that selflessness you displayed in the days after. I mean, that's amazing. Like
I put a lot of it down to team strength rather than individual strength. It's
even so
having guys you're all there together.
Yeah,
you're stronger as a group.
No,
and even coming home, I mean, we sort of would meet up at the pub basically every day. And to go through it with a group of guys that they weren't interested in counselling, because a lot of these guys' older male mindset was, you don't know what I've been through. And fair enough, because not many people did. Not many people had been in that situation. So for us to go to the pub and, a bloke could cry one day and another bloke could cry the next, and we'd all be there for each other, and you couldn't look your mate in the eye and not think you'd been through it, because we'd all been there together. So there was a good sort of get around your mates mentality. But, I think seeking a bit of professional help, got me a hell of a lot further. Yeah.
It was interesting, Dan, talking about someone in the veteran community, that there is that sometimes still, I think, that stigma, or, the old you don't know, you weren't there type thing, and that's understandable. But sometimes you can have, I think he calls it maladaptive co-rumination, where you have that support from people who are there, but you sort of go down in this spiral together. He was sort of reflecting it needs, this is where some of the, just that professional intervention can help it stop becoming this negative thing to catch up with your mates and relive the event, and more of a positive support thing. And it sounds like you found, or you just mentioned, it was pretty positive in terms of the support you were getting from your mates there.
Yeah, it was probably a little bit too much beer drunk, but for it to be positive. But it was, what we did at the time, and was probably what we were doing before the bomb anyway. So.
Well, Wayne Jones talks about closing the loop. Post-Cabello, that cold cup of coffee enables not just you to think about your perspective, but to get everyone else's perspective. You talked about professional help, but a lot of the guys not wanting it. How did they close the loop, or have they closed the loop?
Short answer, no. I think a lot of guys are still scratching their head. I've tried many times, but I have this internal struggle where I actually feel a fair bit of empathy for kids that have come out of, poor communities and fed a whole lot of bullshit to think that blowing up Westerners is a good thing to do.
Yeah.
And so I can't look at a kid on the TV and hate him. It's more the sort of ringleaders that are doing this mind fucking, I suppose, if you could call it. But it's that sort of fight of hatred, survivor's guilt. I remember sort of first acknowledging my PTSD and, obviously knowing a whole lot of guys in the regiment thinking had this huge imposter syndrome of, I shouldn't. And, so there's all types of internal battles, but been in a good place for a while with it, so.
I know you're waiting for me. I know I'm being a coward. Why don't you follow your dreams? Why do you follow your father? Why won't you break free?
So 12 months later, members of the footy club go back to Bali on the 12-month anniversary of the attack, and there's a court case there. Amrosi's an accused. He's being sentenced, and Brad Phillips, when Amrosi gets sentenced to death, storms up to the barrier separating him from the rest of the audience and screams out, "Die, Amrosi." Was this revenge? Is it... What's coursing through your brain?
I think it's just directing.
Veins?
I think, Rooster was just there and torn up, and he had an opportunity to sort of vent it, I suppose. But, it's... Anger's a pretty quick place to end up with it,
There's a little anecdote, again, in an article talking about you who picked up a stone from the bomb site. You carry it with your playing gear, footy playing gear, and before each game, taking the stone out of your bag and kissing it.
Jeez, I hadn't. That's still in my footy bag, I think. And it also goes along with... there's a little piece of brickwork that I took from the old footy club before it got bowled over for the new one. So they sit together. But, I hadn't thought about that in a while. Just a bit of a... Just remember, what you're playing for. It sort of became more than a footy game pretty quickly.
And in fact, the jumper got changed. There was a little bit of writing written on the jumper.
For the boys written at the top of it. So we were allowed to play with that for the 2003 season. Which was a breakout season for me. Played some great footy.
Dashing forward pocket.
No, I'd sort of grown. I was a really short kid, so weirdly I hit puberty at about 20, 21 and sort of shot up and sort of everything started coming together a bit for me. But I couldn't hear, which was a bit of a downfall when you couldn't hear someone that was about to tackle you a metre away on your left-hand side. But so apart from that, I started playing some good footy.
So you've got a lot of good mates inside the SAS regiment. How have you found that? Has that been cathartic?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'd almost say probably cathartic for a lot of blokes as well. I speak pretty deeply about normal stuff that people don't really want to approach as conversations, and allow guys to sort of get it out themselves, and they're able to talk and have a beer with a guy that's not in the unit. So expressing a bit of pain here and there, they know it's not going to get fed back in, and they're going to be thought of as a weaker sort of human being and the likes. But I remember after Dave O'Neill and Crackers and Macca died, being able to be there for the families of people and sort of sit around and have a beer and sort of get people to talk about the shit that everyone was hurt by. Was actually a really fulfilling thing for me to be able to sit there and have Taryn and Sarah and who've become really close friends, be comfortable thinking that the guy that they're talking to has been through some shit as well, and so it's not this. It was sort of somewhat of a counsellor that wasn't a counsellor.
And as you say, sort of disconnect one step from the work side. But still close. And
some guys would ring me up saying, "Can we just go for a beer on a Saturday?" And it would be me and them sitting at the OBH, and I'd sort of think, well, where's everyone else? And they're like, well, I just don't want to talk work. Every time I catch up with these guys, it's talking work. I go to work, I talk work, so...
So those three guys that were tragically killed, drowned in a car in Victoria, terribly.
And actually, I mean, it's interesting you say that, because I I was actually deployed to Timor at the time with the squadron. We came back with a lot of people, including Wayne, for the funerals. And it was this, I think it was 3 and 4 days or something across Australia.
Bang, bang, bang.
Bang, bang, bang. And it was almost like, to your point, it was almost, I remember towards the end, I remember in the first one in Perth, in Cracker's funeral, everyone was still trying to stay staunch. Yeah, and they played Getting Away with Them. People started crying. And by the end of it, before the service even started, everyone was crying. It was almost like this was permission to have those sort of conversations. You just reflected clearly about the 3 guys, our 3 mates we just lost, but also about other stuff, the other sort of, I guess, trauma that maybe was unprocessed from the operational tours we'd done to that stage.
Well, I remember you spoke to the point in a previous episode, Unforgiven 60, where you'd been trained to do all this stuff on deployment, not, hang on, they've died back home. It was just this.
It was so
just
weird.
So left field, so unprepared. So hang on, that wasn't a chapter in the book that we've read.
And literally to the point, and it was the commanding officer at the time who called me to sort of say this had happened, and he said they came off the causeway.
Yep.
And I'm trying to think in Tarin Kowt, is there a causeway? It was obviously it was in Afghanistan.
But your brain has
people only die in Afghanistan. And then it was just. And I remember I kept. When I was talking to the squadron, I kept referring to weddings. I said, we can only send 20 people back for the weddings. And for some reason, I kept saying weddings instead of funerals. It was a really weird sort of, process.
Mm. So you've described a couple of roles that you've taken in assisting others. What would your advice be to people who are going through trauma, who have confronted the most profound adversity? What are the lessons learned from your life that might be completely transferable if someone's sitting there thinking, I'm struggling to get through something in my life?
Pick up the phone. There's so many places you can call, and everyone's got a friend that wants to help as well. But don't just rely and use them as a fallback. Professional help's there. It's called that for a reason. It's a pretty valuable tool. If you don't get along with your first counsellor, try a second, try a third, try a fourth, keep going. You'll find someone. I've been lucky to, have several counsellors that have all been a great fit, whether that's my openness to it and always sort of willing to give it a shot. But I've also found some I get along with all the counsellors, but they all have a different skill set on different focuses and where to dig and where to probe. And, I've got them to thank for being... I know it's in good condition, but in far better condition than I could have been, I suppose.
Well, I think that definition of resilience, the one that was given to us by Dr. Lee Snowdebart, that resilience is...
better than expected outcome given the adversity faced. I mean,
You'd be the definition of that.
And I just want to hone in on that idea of giving the adversity faced, because I think there's a couple of prime sort of blockers for people to seek help, and one is this sort of... I guess I find the analogy of a physical injury. I mean, if you'd blown your knee out, but you're playing footy, you'd go straight to the doctor, and you get this big dose of trauma or a cumulative dose of trauma, and yet we don't seem to want to get the help in the same way. But the other, you mentioned the term imposter syndrome before, almost, and if I'm reading this wrong, correct me, but almost like, well, that stress I experienced doesn't warrant having PTSD. Was that the kind of...
Well, I think PTSD is a different thing for everyone.
Absolutely.
Obviously, in defence and first responder sort of stuff, it's pretty similar. But the way mine would come through would be very dependent on how I was taking care of myself. And so normally I'd just hit the floor and then I'd reflect and go, hang on, the 4 weeks leading up to that, you went out a hell of a lot. Yeah. You weren't looking after yourself. You weren't eating well. You weren't, so there's some really easy things that I can do to just keep myself well. So it took me a while until the penny really dropped, and I thought, holy shit, this is actually something I've got. And it was like a weight had come off my shoulder. I just let it hit me and thought, well, actually, there's actually nothing wrong with that. And even the acknowledgement of it and finding those triggers and how you can benefit yourself is a hugely positive thing.
Yeah. And I think, from the work we've done and from our mates, this idea that the stressor needs to be some threshold, like you need to have been in a bomb blast or a combat zone, it's bullshit. I mean, the way it works, it is relative to the individual. It's pointless trying to compare, that girl went through something much worse than me and she's okay, so I shouldn't seek help. I mean, that's a very it's an incorrect comparison to be trying to make.
Yeah, and Bo Miles brought it up previously, where he said he felt he didn't have a specific story to write on. You know, I've been watching his stuff for years.
Yeah,
now.
most interesting dude on the planet.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
He's so good. I love the way he thinks. I love the way he approaches stuff. Like I've got a huge respect for Bo. But and going back again, you know what Hamish Blake said about the four-legged table. You know, if you've got something wrong, you can't just work on the other three legs. You've got to fix the fourth leg for it to stand up. So,
sensitive subject on mental health, but you've posted in social media a couple of things that have alluded to former teammates of yours that have taken their own life. Yeah, is that as a result of 2002? Is there a direct relationship with that? Yeah, yep. So we lost Adam Nimmo at the start of the year in February, took his own life, and Adam's had a pretty up and down 19 years. He's gone through what we thought was a pretty good patch the last couple, and I'd spoken to him basically the day before he took his own life, and we were really close, and so I'm always super open with Adam. I'll try and make him feel as comfortable, and I always sort of make myself vulnerable to allow him sort of the space to sort of come in. Should he feel that there's something going on in his life he wants to sort of lean on a mate for. Obviously, we've been through basically hell and back together. And so when he took his life the next day, that hurt. That really hurt. So just to think that he was in so much pain and struggling and didn't feel he could lean on his mates. It's unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah, that was a hard couple of days. And one thing we've learned how to do well is honour, I suppose, a mate's life, and we sort of celebrate it pretty well. Not just throwing a party for a party's sake, but we threw a good one for Adam.
Yeah. Well, we talked about the Gratwick Club on Anzac Day, and you and I witnessed it, the way that the pewters, which are encased in a wonderful box, the pewters all relate to someone who has been killed on operations, and you take the pewter out, it gets filled for you, whilst you're holding the pewter, tell a story that relates to that person. Just a wonderful way to encode memories.
Yeah, I've been honoured to drink out of a few of those dog bowls at times.
That's true, yeah. So below the four
some animals
operators, there's the dogs that have also been killed.
But their lives celebrated, yeah.
Yeah. So you've spoken about sort of the advice you'd give to someone who's dealing with trauma and just to reach out, make that first step. What tools have you found useful for you to sort of work towards that idea of post-traumatic growth?
The last counsellor and I were working on a lot of emotional connection stuff. When big things happen in my life, I seem to sort of flick it to the side and think of the positives and keep on trucking sort of thing, and to stop and acknowledge and understand, and whether that's if you're driving along the road and Getting Away With It comes on the radio and you feel like a tear's welling up. Yeah. Don't change channel, keep the song on, but maybe pull over and take a moment to go, my breath's tightened a little. I'm feeling emotional. Why am I feeling emotional? Because, these boys meant a lot, or whatever it might be. But just understanding that, and then sitting in it for as long as you feel comfortable. Not too long, but giving it enough space to go to sort of feel that emotion, and then pushing on. And emotion's not a bad thing, to let out a tear every now and then. And Tim, I'll go back, and I think I thanked you for this at the Grado when I came and said hello. But you talking about your dad at your Anzac Day, what you'd miss from COVID and lockdown was being able to spend those moments, and just hearing that little break in your voice and hearing you take it on board. It's really special. I was sitting in my shed and listening to that episode, and it meant a lot, and I'm sure there would be a heap of other blokes in their sheds on their own on Anzac Day having a beer that would have really taken a lot from that. So thank you for that. It was really special.
Just a big crybaby, mate.
Mate, so am I. Oh. I cry at the undercover boss, you've got a job, here's $10,000.
But I mean,
it's so beautiful.
That is funny that's even a thing, and back in the day I think it really was, and it's awesome that I don't think it is so much anymore. And certainly in the circles I think we're moving in, that people are starting to recognise exactly what you just said, Macca, that these are emotions.
Yeah.
You know, they're not they're not strong or weak or anything. They're natural reactions to stuff that's gone on, and even that idea of recognising that this isn't weird or there's nothing wrong with me, that this is actually just how your body processes this stuff.
No, I'm a crybaby, but I also put my hand up and say I'm fucking tough as well. Like, you know what I mean? Like, why does an emotion have to be a negative or bad connotation, you know, when you can take some strengths and positives from it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm just a crybaby. Well, Erin Hoey, who's a meditation teacher, I mean, obviously my meditation teacher, I've spoken about her before, but who's done work with us on one of our recent retreats, she talks about surfing the emotion, like exploring why you feel a certain thing. It doesn't have to be sadness or guilt, it could be happiness, but just being present with that emotion and understanding why you do it. And I quite like that.
And I like that, almost that recognition, you know, your emotions, your thoughts aren't yourself. You know, a lot of addiction therapy talks about that surf the urge, recognise this is your body craving something and you can ride it. But even other just day-to-day reactions, being able to sort of recognise, that's my old mate jealousy bloody creeping in, or there's my ego going, or whatever. It normalises a bit for me anyway, and I sort of, you can distance and process it better.
Yeah, I would also say, like, I lost my old man about 7 years ago, and that knocked me around a lot, you know, and it was expected. He had MND, so we went through this 2 years of sort of a downward spiral. Yeah. But when it sort of happened, it knocked me around a lot, and I used to get really emotional about it until I thought, well, if I didn't get emotional about this, such an incredible human being, what kind of bloke am I?
Yeah, that's right.
I remember Mark Donaldson once saying, and this is the first time I'd heard it, but you know, they call it post-traumatic stress disorder. It'd be a disorder if you didn't have a reaction to some of this stress. And clearly, I mean, that's a medical term and it's DSM, diagnostic thing, got it. But this idea that it's abnormal to be having these ill effects after a massive stressor, it kind of paints it in the wrong picture, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So we're coming up to 20 years post Bali bombing, and there's been, well, an interestingly timed announcement that the bomb makers' prison sentence will be foreshortened. Yeah. How did that feel for you? Did it conjure up any sorts of emotion?
I think I learnt many years ago that life sort of just isn't fair at times, you know, and so I almost laughed and thought, of course the timing is just perfect, isn't it?
Naturally,
They couldn't I think they picked him up in 2011. He'd put some pretty nasty bombs together alongside the 2002 Sari Club bomb. Been on the run since 2002 to 2011, as I said, and picked up in 2011, given a 20-year sentence, and he's out in 10, sort of thing. It sort of seems a bit odd, but that is their system, and it is what it is, and I can't. Brad from Perth can't change that. So,
well, Macca, what about forgiveness? I mean, the Indonesians would say he's been de-radicalised. There's reform. Is forgiveness an option?
For me, yes, but I think he has actually shown and proven he wanted to meet with victims and victims' families pretty early on and apologise, and he was pretty forthcoming with that. And I don't know, there's probably some bigger fish, you know, a barbecue Bashir. I wouldn't mind spending a bit of time with him, but I think there's sort of key people that make decisions that, you know, I don't think you can change. They've made a pretty clear decision to go down a certain path, but the sort of pawns that are underneath them, if I lived my life thinking about, taking that anger with me, I wouldn't be getting very far.
Well, and you mentioned before that you're not unempathetic towards some of these folk in terms of how they've been brought up. I think you used the term mindfuck, which is a pretty, I think, apt description of some of the indoctrination that some of these folk have gone through. And, I mean, my goodness, it happens on all sides of the equation. I mean,
absolutely.
But it's hard to detach. I mean, it's that wonderful Orwell quote, from a distance, everything seems really clear. The closer you get, the vaguer it becomes. I mean, it's easy to just put someone up as bad and to hate them and that sort of stuff. And then when you start uncovering, well, you know, what do they believe? What have they seen? What have they experienced with it? You know, and it's funny that concept of hate. I think people have been involved in these sort of things when you think about it, it is hard just to have that two-dimensional sort of view on a lot of these kind of issues.
Yeah, I came back pretty angry. Like I was a pretty angry kid for a couple of years afterwards, and then it just, I think there was just a penny dropped in my head and thought, well, the only person that's getting worked up and upset is you, and you're only going to
what do you always say about anger, Tim? What kind of emotion is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of pointless emotion. It doesn't actually get you anywhere.
Yeah, feel good every now and then.
When the news,
you don't feel good. That's the irony.
Yeah, you don't.
It's not good for anyone around you. It's not good for you. It's completely pointless.
I had one of those moments in year 12 when something had gone wrong at school, and I punched one of those pin-up boards, expecting the foam inside it, but I'd hit one of the metal rods of the framing and busted my hand. Fortunately, no one saw it, but I had a cast on for a while and felt pretty stupid. It was one of those immediate responses.
Further proof that anger is a dumb emotion.
Yeah. And the only person that really gets burnt up is yourself. And, we've got a boys' chat line, the guys that survived, and there was a fair bit of noise on it when we heard that news come through the other day. And I sort of said, guys, don't burn yourselves up. That's their culture. We can't change it. Yep, it's fucked. But the life ain't fair. And if you haven't worked that out by now, you wouldn't be on this text group. Yeah.
Let's talk some rock and roll real quickly. You were at a gig that you played at, Benjamin, where you were told to stop because there was a wedding next door. You're too noisy, this rock band. And what happened next?
Well, we spoke, tragically about Cracker's funeral, but Cracker's... We'd started Tongue Charge, so sit back. You've opened the gates.
We don't need the whole Wikipedia page on it.
Wasn't it a COAG or something?
What's that?
Was it a COAG over in Brizzy?
Yes, yeah. So Wayne and I started sort of playing together, and clearly none of us could sing. It was Chogham, yeah, exactly, the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. And then Brooke, who couldn't even spell the word bass, said, I want to play what's the easiest instrument, and it's clearly bass. Yeah. And so we formed this little nucleus and we were playing, but none of us could sing, and sort of Wayne and I would timidly try and sing out of tune, and it just wasn't working. And then we'd heard about, Wayne knew Crackers. I hadn't met him at that stage, a guy in a different squadron.
Also an excellent footballer, mind you.
Yeah, great footy player.
Yeah, probably not a lot he couldn't do, the old Cracker.
And he only had one speed.
Oh, yeah.
It was either go or stop.
But his thing was, out in the clubs, and he'd sort of talk to the band and kick the lead singer off if there was a live band, and then just bring the house down. Yeah. And so we said, we need a bit of
shirt off, one arm push-ups with a mic in the other hand. He was an animal.
He was the quintessential stereotype front man, wasn't
Absolutely.
He? Like larger than life sort of thing. Anyway, so he came on board, and this one particular night played at the OBH. We were terrible, obviously, but the bar knew, or the pub knew we'd bring a lot of thirsty friends, and so it was worth their while. And we were supposed to finish at midnight. It was a function area next to a place, or the function area next door was having a wedding, and they were saying, you need to cut it. And of course, that was a red rag talk with Crackers. We'd finished anyway. But
the set was over.
No one tells me to stop, boys. 1, 2, 3, 4. And so we didn't get invited back, but it was good fun.
What's your power song? We often ask our guests, what's the song that gives them a little motivation? Maybe you've got it in the headphones before you run out onto the footy ground, or you need to be inspired.
Power song, okay, because I'm a real Aussie, Paul Kelly, country sort of folky sort of music, but power song was always Rage Against the Machine, Ghost of Tom Joad, and it was a Bruce Springsteen cover that they did.
I've got to look that up. I'm a big Rage fan. Yeah,
cool.
Yeah.
Well, the Unforgiving 60 podcast has the Unforgiving 60 playlist on Spotify. We'll include it.
There you go.
Unforgiving 60 playlist. We'll
listen to both versions.
We already have some Rage Against the Machine on that playlist.
Oh, it's classic power song stock. But yeah, we'll chuck Bruce's version on as well. Timmy, has your power song changed? If I recall correctly,
I'm just staying with Jimmy Barnes' No Second Prize because I just love it. And actually, I do periodically listen to the playlist when I'm running. Full disclosure, that's not very often. And I like it, when No Second Prize comes on. It actually reminds me of a bus trip to a grand final when I was playing for the Australian Defence Force Academy. And, we put that song on, and it kind of takes me back to sitting in the bus, just feeling the emotions and the anticipation before a grand final. Yeah,
You'd get through the whole 90-song playlist in a 5K run, wouldn't you?
Very funny.
Well, you guys have always also been great in getting the externals back onto Spotify and iTunes. I've been listening to their back catalogues. It's so good.
And in their most recent social media post, they've said they're going to be touring. They have already been touring in Sydney and I think also in Melbourne, but they're coming to the West Coast.
Brilliant.
To do some tours.
I think they play with the Cosmic Psychos over there too.
They're good mates.
Right.
In fact, Harry Moff was hitting Wayne and I up about a double header, and if we can get it together, so that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I've never met Moff, but some of those songs are brilliant.
No, he's a very talented guy. Clearly a really multi-talented guy as well.
And their latest song also absolute ripper.
Yeah. No, good stuff. The externals. If you haven't checked that out, we'll provide some more links, and clearly the majority of the music we play throughout the podcast is kindly been offered to us from the externals.
Much of their discography we have.
A large portion of their discography.
You seem to go to the same songs every time, though.
Yeah, so do I.
Lazy editing.
Fantastic. Hey, Macca, thank you very much for coming in and having a conversation that we know is super difficult.
Yep.
And, coming up to the anniversary, the 20th anniversary of Bali Bombing, it's going to be a difficult day for everyone. I think all Australians will have a moment on that day, and we certainly will as well. But thank you for coming on the show.
And look, finally, just to echo Macca's comments earlier, Jesus, if you are hurting at all, please reach out. We'll put some links in the show notes to some outstanding free counselling services. There are a bunch, as Macca mentioned, and that first step is it's like going to the doctor if you do your knee. You need to make that first step.
Can I also finish on, if you're a support person for someone as well, there is a million avenues out there as well.
Good call.
All the standard Lifeline, Beyond Blues, they're there as a support network for supporters and carers as well as a person in need. So absolutely, seek them out.
Great pickup. Cheers, Macca.
Daniel's saving grace. She's out in deep water. Hope he's a good swimmer. Daniel plays his ace deep inside his temple. He knows how to serve her. Getting away with it all messed up. Getting away with it all messed up. That's the living. Getting away with it all messed up. Getting away with it all messed up. That's the living. Daniel drinks his weight, drinks like Richard Burton, dance like John Travolta. Now Daniel's saving grace. He was off for drowning. Now they live like dolphins. Getting away with it all messed up. Getting away with it all messed up. That's a living. Getting away with it all messed up. Getting away with it all messed up. That's a living.
Now to the debrief. We try to go always a little further in this podcast and greatly appreciate your input. Please let us know your feedback, the good, the bad, or the ugly. Also, if you know someone who is living a life less ordinary, we'd love to hear about them. You can get in touch at debrief@unforgiving60.com. That's debrief@unforgiving60.com. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please tell your friends and write a review for us on Apple Podcasts. Until next episode, keep filling your unforgiving minutes with 60 seconds worth of distance run. See you next time on the Unforgiving 60.